Today, we're going to be talking about the sea level rise in Florida and how it impacts climate change. To start off, we're talking about the importance of mangroves. Mangroves are a type of vegetation that protect the coastline from sea level rise. When there's higher levels of sea rise, there's higher mangrove growth, and when there's lower levels of sea rise, there's lower mangrove growth. Mangroves prevent the coastline from transitioning to estuarine environments, which are a mix of fresh and salt water. Estuarine environments cause an increase in soil salinity, which can be damaging to the surrounding vegetation. However, increased storm intensity is putting mangroves at risk. Bad storms, such as hurricanes, which are very common in Florida, cause substantial mangrove die-off. This leaves the coastline vulnerable for destruction. As climate variability and climate change increases and gets worse, storm intensity increases, taking out mangrove shorelines in Florida's coastline. As for long-term environmental changes in Florida, there is a subject known as saltwater intrusion. As the mangroves die off and salt marshes begin to move inward, they invade the surrounding vegetation. This causes soil salinity and flooding to increase. This causes non-optimal growth conditions for the surrounding vegetation, a reduction in available fresh water due to the saltwater intrusion, vegetation change, which leads to reduced biodiversity, which leaves the environment more vulnerable. This leads to erosion and sediment disruption, which can cause pollution in surrounding waterways. And this prevents forests damaged in storms from recovering. Hence, more intense storms are making changes in Florida worse.
A city underwater. So sea level rise in Florida can pose significant risks to property and homes due to the increased flooding, erosion, and other coastal hazards that Florida is known for getting the brink of. And with sea level rising, we can see catastrophic damage to homes, roads, airports, cities, ports, and etc. And all of this is because of the increased flooding, especially during high tide, storm surges, and other heavy rainfall events. And this flooding can damage property and homes through the inundation of low-lying areas, which include those residential properties, and that can cause structural damage to the buildings as well as erosion of the foundations that those buildings were built on, and as well damage to infrastructure such as like the roads and utilities, and like in the utilities in those areas that people built their homes around, as well as it can cause damage to belongings such as mold growth and long-term degradation of building materials. And sea level rise can also cause erosion of coastal land that includes like the beaches and the dunes, which again impact the properties located near the coast. And in response to all of this, like all these potential impacts of sea level rise, policymakers and property owners need to be aware of those potential risks and making sure that they're taking the appropriate actions to mitigate these risks and protect those families that are being evicted because of their houses that are being considered effectively unlivable and uninhabitable, and making sure they're taking the right steps into solving this problem as a whole and not just trying to repair its damage along the way.
Building off of the previous slide, property is starting to disappear in Florida due to the sea level rise and flooding. This is known as climate gentrification. Along as the land is disappearing, this is causing economic losses because the land is beginning to lose its value. Since 2005, $465 million have been lost in real estate, and this number is only projected to substantially increase. Due to the loss in real estate, there is forced inward migration of human populations, along with other species, causing inward communities' populations to become more dense.
This statistic refers to an experiment conducted in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, where they used 19th and 20th century surveys and imagery to compare the total amount of tidal marsh lost at a shoreline. The total amount of tidal marsh lost at the shoreline was about negative 43 kilometers squared. On the other hand, 82 kilometers squared was converted to marsh, with 66 kilometers squared of forest being converted to forest or marsh transitional habitat. Although a decent amount of the shoreline was lost, it was not as bad as it could have been due to the salinity of the saltwater decreasing after being mixed with fresh water. Instead, the amount of intertidal area on the coast increased. Everglades National Park. This article talks about the effects of sea level rise on the hardwood, hammocks, and buttonwood forests of the Everglades National Park. Usually, the forests are watered naturally through precipitation, but with rising sea levels, it is affecting the composition of what is watering the trees. This leads to saltwater stress on the trees and ultimately leads them to grow not as much. To test this, they collected data from the forest over 11 years and found that this sea level rise not only affects the trees, but also affects other rare species in the park. It also affects species and the surrounding area around the park. Florida coastal Everglades. So at the time, hydrological modification lowered water levels and flows, and to combat this, a program was formed called the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program, or CERP. But since sea level rise wasn't factored into this program, they did not realize the effects that this would have on the Everglades. So instead of the Everglades improving over the years, long-lasting effects of sea level rise, such as changes in ground surface elevation and the decrease in fresh to marine head difference, would greatly affect the park. And to combat this problem, they decided to advocate for sea level rise to be factored into their program. And these are our references.